Hello and welcome to our second ever Summit Up conversation. My name is Joelle Martinez and I'm President and CEO of the Latino Leadership Institute. And again, on this Summit Up conversation, I'm joined by my dear friend and partner in this work, Harry Hollines. Hi, Harry. Good morning or afternoon, since you're calling in from Puerto Rico.
That's right. That's right. Good morning to you. Afternoon over here.
We don't hold that against you, not in the least. I want to welcome everyone back to Sum It Up. And for those that joined last week and for those that are new to this conversation, just want to remind us why Harry and I are stepping way outside of our comfort zone to have these types of conversations live in community. And one, it's a recognition of the moments that we are all navigating. It is a recognition that we truly believe here at the LLI that we are stronger together. And we really need to be together as community, bringing conversations out in the public and really being there for one another. And thirdly, we fundamentally believe that this is not a time to lose momentum, that despite everything that we are up against and going through, we have to continue to sum it up. We have to continue to keep moving towards our goals and continue on this journey together. And last week we had such fabulous engagement. Harry, I mean, it absolutely blew away any expectation that we had. And we want to continue to encourage that. We want to continue to use the chat this morning, afternoon, depending on where you're calling from, adding your take, your insights, your feedback, your thoughts on these important topics we're going to discuss today. And we'll use those to continue the conversation. And today's conversation really came from those that attended last week. We received so many, private messages, comments, really focused on this notion about how everyone was feeling and doing in this moment. There was a lot of comments that we received about just being completely emotionally depleted, defeated, and, having to navigate chaotic moments and processing through all the distraction to keep going. And, Harry came back after we really looked at all of your comments and said, we really need to talk about building up. We really have to be honest about the importance of self-care, not as some sort of nice to have, but self-care as a strategy for success. And, Harry's good about reminding me and reminding the team that we're no good to this work if we're not good to each other first. And so today's topic is just that. How do we build up to avoid the burnout? And I know I speak for a lot of us today when we say that we are honestly, if not already there, on the verge of that burnout. So Harry and I want to use our own lived experience and some transparency about what we're going through right now as individuals and as a community to try to help and encourage all of us to use these resources and tools to build up. Harry, anything you'd add on today's welcome or anything from last week you'd like to shine a light on before we get started?
No, I think covered exactly. That was a lot of the comments. Everyone is going through a lot in a different way, but I think the commonality across it is how much is coming at you, and every day seems like a battle in some respects. So you get up, and how do you work your way through that in two respects, both yourself as an individual, then how do you actually prepare yourself to do your work also? And so those go hand in hand, and hopefully that's what the day is about.
Yeah. And I know this is personal for both of us, and I'll remind those that attended and those just joining, this is totally outside of my comfort zone, Harry's comfort zone. Being this transparent and vulnerable is in a way new to us. We may do it privately, but we're doing it out in public. And this topic of building it up is something that Harry and I and other members of the team, and even throughout the LLI's work and our professional development work, have intentionally focused on, because so many of us have faced burnout throughout our lives and careers. And my kids, they're high schoolers, and they're constantly challenging me and saying, Mom, why do we have to study history? And I answer the same way every time, and that's because history has a tendency of repeating itself. And what I noticed is that for me personally, history was beginning to repeat itself, both in the work that I was doing and in the moment that I'm navigating, but also some of my very bad tendencies that lead to burnout. So I'll just begin by setting the stage as to why this topic is so deeply personal for me and one I am willing to share publicly, because I want to normalize these conversations and I want to really help build community to intervene around them. But almost exactly 20 years ago to the date, the year was 2006. And at the time, I had a different life and a different job. But at the same time, a lot of what we're feeling and going through today was happening back then. I was a regional director for a pretty significant organization with offices all over the West and the Southwest. And to put that time into context for some of you, is that 2006, much like what we're facing today, was a moment of great challenge, particularly for our Latino communities across the country. In 2006, Latino communities were facing what we were calling at the time a middle class squeeze, right? This notion of economic mobility was out of reach for far too many of us. We had political turmoil in Washington D.C. and battles that were happening on the policy side. And probably most alarming at that time were the presentation of new immigration policies that were going to rip at the heart of many in our community, particularly our undocumented. And I then, like now, found myself in a space of community leadership, not just leading my team and working through the organization, but during those times, we were coming together as community in order to talk about how we were going to really take a stand and ensure the safety and the prosperity of our communities. And if you were involved back in those days, I can say that because it was 20 years ago, um, you might remember we had La Marcha in LA, and 500,000 Latinos came and marched on a single day. May 1st of 2006, we had a day without an immigrant that was to show our economic power. So we weren't shopping, we weren't moving, we were reminding ourselves and everyone else about our contributions and why. And these were very powerful movements, but to organize them, to lead them, it meant 15, 18-hour workdays. It meant that I was operating through stress and anxiety and fear. I mean, real fear about asking community to come together in a potentially vulnerable situation. And for months, I operated under this pattern of stress, ridiculous work environments and hours, and real fear, and never addressing any of them in the moment. And at the end of the day, folks and friends, I ended up in the hospital. I was less than 90 pounds and I was sick. And a lot of that was because I worked so hard and felt so deeply about that moment. It's a real sacrifice. I call leadership sometimes a burden and a blessing. And particularly in moments like that and moments like these, we can find ourselves in this burden and blessing cycle. I just want to close by that level of transparency and telling you all I am a work in progress, and anyone on this team knows that I am still a workaholic. I still have a tendency to just avoid, dealing in real moment and taking pause. But I spent a lot of time, especially in the hospital, in the immediate aftermath of that situation, reflecting on the why. Why do we as leaders find ourselves in these kind of patterns, in these moments? And why is it so important that we break those cycles? And I have to tell you that over the years, I've really recognized that part of this was simply the fact I was a young Latina leader and executive. And in my backpack, my invisible backpack, I carry around false narratives that somehow we can't be weak. We have to have all the answers. I can't ask for help, because if I ask for help, then that means that maybe I'm not as capable as I should be to take on these roles in the first place. And I fear, failing anyone, my team, my community, my ancestors that worked hard to advance us to this stage. And so in this backpack, I carried around with me all of these false expectations that somehow the strategy for success was actually being a superhero, of which I am not, because I'm simply human. And so this notion of building up to avoid burnout is so deeply, deeply personal for me, because I know that the long-term journey is going to require all of us to be as strong as possible. And strength sometimes is vulnerability. It is asking for help. It is taking a step back. It is putting yourself first. And so I know, Harry, you too, before we even get to what we're doing in this moment, you too have had a past experience with this. And I've heard it, but I'd love for you to share with others as well.
I'll be happy to. And I think you touched on the cultural aspect, Joelle, which is, we always tend to want to help everyone in our community first, and that is right, and the heart's in the right place. And we bypass ourselves, not realizing if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not our best self to actually make the impact we want to make in our community. I started thinking a lot about this, and there's one thing I've always done, and there's one thing I learned that I'll tell the quick story on. The one thing I've always done is, busco a mi gente, right? I always look for my community. And I've always said, as long as you drop me off in my neighborhood, drop me off in my community, nothing but good is going to come out of it. So I've always done that. What I've learned, and probably learned the hard way, was to practice self-help. And for me, the quick story, and probably the most pivotal time in my, at least professional career, in a lot of ways my personal career, was I got my first C-suite position, and it was in the late 90s, and most of my career is in tech, as you know, Joelle. And that was when the dot-com boom about happened, is when I had that. So I just had months after months, and half of my responsibility was outside the U.S. So I had Latin America, South America, and Europe, flying everywhere, 100,000 miles, saying no to nothing. I'm doing everything. And one day I had a pain in my heart, went into the doctor, and he said, look, you have high blood pressure. At that time, I think I put on about 40 pounds. And he just said, look, you're on a dangerous path. It's your choice. You can take care of yourself or else. And he goes, I don't know if you're going to like the or else option. He said, you need to figure out something, get more active, do something. He suggested running. That kind of made sense to me. My dad was a runner. And he literally said, run 1 mile every other day for 30 days and come back in. I did that, went back 30 days later, all my vitals improved, and that was great. But the other thing was my spirit was stronger. And then I'll say it again, busca mi gente. I went back, and one of my friends said, from Mexico, said, you know what, study the Tarahumara. And I did. He said, you just left it at that. And maybe people ought to know it. For Native people, running it's very spiritual. It's a form of prayer. It's a form of spiritual connection. So this thing I was feeling was real. And not only was it real, it was bringing me strength and resilience and fortitude. And as I think about it 20 years later, and I still log 50, 60 miles a week, it's my thing. It is my way connecting with my ancestors. It's how I build my strength. It's where I get my perspective from. Because when I think about our ancestors, many times whatever we're going through is nada compared to what they went through and what they endured. And so it's a bridge. It's a passing of strength. It's a passing. It makes me a better person, a better father, a better husband. And if I'm stronger, I can make more impact in our community. And that's my way of just, kind of saying how critical it is to put yourself first and to battle that cultural thing that I know we all have, whereas we'll drop everything and go help everyone. But we have to stop just for a second, be a little bit selfish, take care of yourself, and then go back and make impact.
There's so much in there. So I too share your love. Well, I don't love running. I do it though. And it is true, right? This is where I get my ideas. It's where I break away from everything. We know that running, yoga, any form of exercise is going to reduce those stress and anxiety hormones and cortisol by 20-30%. And so it has a physical reaction beyond the spiritual and the mental that I think whatever your activity is, you got to do. And I just, again, going back to history repeating itself, this was kind of a wake up call for me just in the last few weeks and days. We were talking about it internally, and we've been talking about it as a team here at the LLI. I'm going to be a little transparent this morning about just the significance of the moment that we're all experiencing here at the organization, but I know more broadly in community and in the organizations that you all are leading. And we're really good, I think, as a team to say, you need to focus, you need to find joy, you need to take care of yourself, you need to slow down. I don't know how many times you've said that. A member of the team a couple weeks ago reminded me I could phone a friend, and said, gosh, this seems so lonely being in this leadership position. Can you ask for help? And this is all part of this strategy of self-care. And again, self-care is not an option, it is a necessity. If you are building your strategic framework for an organization about how to navigate VUCA, self-care has to be part of that. And each member, I think, of our team right now is doing different and unique things that work for them. One of the key indicators for me, though, that I'm getting close to burning out and not doing a job of building up is how I'm dealing with stress. And stress is such a powerful aura that sits on our hearts and in our minds. And from a neuro kind of biological way, there's a difference between stress and anxiety. And from kind of a cognitive approach, stress is really the focus, almost the obsession on the negative, and it piles up over time in your mind and your heart, and you get in this really terrible loop that everything is doomsday. And listen, today in this world we're navigating, it's hard not to get caught up on this. I mean, Harry and I talk about this all the time. Like, I feel like we're building up almost every day. You got to reapply the armor, and that armor's got some cracks in it, and you got to fill the cracks, and you got to keep putting it on every single day in order to do and navigate this work. But these last few weeks, Harry, if I had a stress barometer, it would be like off the charts. Like many organizations that serve our community to build wealth, to advance careers, to grow entrepreneurs, we are, like every other organization out there, getting impacted by the shifting environment. It's not even a shifting environment. It's a wrecking ball right now. That's what it feels like as you were navigating. And this wrecking ball is coming kind of from all fronts. Specifically, in the last couple of weeks, we had been working for years on a grant that was going to help us move our entrepreneurship and wealth building forward, and found out because of the changing priorities in DC that that was very unlikely. And so as an organizational leader, as a human being, you've worked on something, and many of you listening have been working on projects. Share that out. Share your experience with working on things to find them either in a state of uncertainty, volatility, pause, or utter destruction. But we've been experiencing that as an organization. And I found myself back in those bad habits, Harry, of working until I don't even know what time, waking up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning with my mind racing, thinking about how I was going to solve this, getting in bad habits of not talking externally, not inviting others to help me, and thinking I could solve all of this and come up with the solution by myself. And I stopped going to the gym and I stopped running, and for about a 2-week period. And I told you and our other teammate Alina last week that I felt pretty burned out and I needed a break. And I told you that. I was honest with you. And stress is such a big moment, but I got to tell you that in order to overcome the negative, if there's one thing I'm doing right now to deal with not only the wrecking ball and play some offense and defense right now, which is necessary as leaders, is to overcome the negative in my mind. I have to really stretch my growth mindset muscle, which means that I have to begin to write opportunistic lists. What are the opportunities? What are the other pathways forward? I have to diminish my stress with some positive thoughts and action items. And I find most of my positivity by talking to people and being with people and leveraging other really smart people to help me see the way through. So right now I'm looking at lists of positivity, and I'm looking at how I can get energy and ideas and positivity from others. Two things I did not do back in 2006. Doesn't mean the stress levels are not high, doesn't mean what we're navigating is not real, but I think just the acknowledgement of what it is and how we have to overcome it is really important. And I know you recently have been really leveraging some great advice from brilliant minds. And I know even today you were talking about the importance of focus. But I'm just curious, other than stress, I mean, you're going through the same things I am as the organizational leader and community leader. But what are you dealing with, and how are you intervening to make sure you're building up and not burning out?
I'm going to go back to that busco a mi gente, and that's like what we're doing right now. I mean, hopefully for me, probably for you, and hopefully for everyone in our community that's even in the comments, that's what actually this is about, what we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate connections, build more relationships, and then do it in a safe space that we can do it. Because we always talk about our power is internal. And quite frankly, we have massive numbers from California to New York. It is amazing how many of us don't know each other. And if we can help build new bridges along the way, there's not only power in there, there's healing in there, because that's when you can go and find, and you can be vulnerable and get some great answers and get some great feedback. That's kind of where even I kind of figured out, and I struggle with this as a work in progress. How do I build yourself up, and then how you do your work? And someone in our community said, take a look at Kari Williams, and I know you know her from your political days. She's been in politics about 30 years and a life coach, and it's also amazing. She kind of has a specialty dealing with introverts. So, we would probably be her, two great clients for her, but we'd be great clients for her. But she says one of the things she talks about, and she has what she calls microactivism and 10 things you can do. And it's not just activism in the traditional sense. It's just to do your work, is to hyper narrow your area of focus. And she talks about you should only do one, no more than two things, and that is it. And it sounds great. And you think about implementing that, and I bring in kind of the cultural aspect of how we all operate. It means you need to say no to way more things than you say yes to. But her point was, if you don't find that one or two things that you do, you're going to get overwhelmed and you're not going to make any progress at all. Because I think about 10 ping pong balls, you can walk up and down the line, move 1 inch, or you can take one and run it to the end. And that's kind of what, I try to do, kind of taking advice from her and others, and dealing with kind of how we function as a community and culturally. She had a great answer that I just loved. She said, it can be hard to say no, but actually it's easy to say no if, one, you recognize the power of your community, and two, if you trust your community. And her last point was really powerful, because the trust was around, there's so much brilliance and talent in our community. Trust that someone is in another swim lane doing their work, because everything lands with us. Education, criminal justice, housing, everything. We have incredible organizations and individuals in each of those lanes. Find your lane that you have your expertise and your specialty and your passion in. Keep running with it. Stay involved with everything. But I constantly work on myself to say, no, let me find who in our community already does this, been doing this, is an expert in it. And if I can support it, great, but I don't need to lead. You can't lead everything, and you shouldn't, when we have all this great talent and expertise in our community doing it. So there's a trust aspect to it.
I think that is such an important topic, and I want to talk about trust a little bit more, because I think about this invisible backpack that we carry that perpetuates some of our behaviors and our thinking and our leadership styles. And you've said a couple things that really hit home for me, and you're a perfect partner in this because you remind me of this. But one, I do think trusting the community is critical. And it's so important. You got to trust that they have your back, we have each other's back, and that people are working in their areas of expertise. And the combination of everyone working is what is going to move us forward. And that's really hard for me. I'm going to be totally honest. Like, this has been a work in progress for me, to be so trusting and to not feel like I have to be responsible for all things. I have a hard time saying no. I'm a problem solver. So when I get a phone call from a member of our community, and we have 56,000 Latino professionals, entrepreneurs, alumni. So you can imagine that as an organization, that we have all the things that are happening as a community that ultimately come back sometimes to you and I specifically, and to the team specifically. And at the first few weeks and months of this year, I've had to be very disciplined to say, I can't take that on too. I can't help you solve that problem. It isn't, I don't have the bandwidth for that. And I've used that word a lot. I don't have the bandwidth for that. And I think that my old self, because I didn't focus in on trusting others and carried in my invisible backpack this unrealistic burden that I and I alone carried all of the responsibility, that burden and blessing of leadership, have really had to lean into trust, and trusting that there's others taking care of it, and trusting in myself that I don't need to be all things to all people to be impactful. In fact, if I continue to try to do that, I'm going to end up again burning out, and then failing what I am responsible in leading. And so I think that's such an important lesson, and one that I am working on every day, is how do I trust? How do I
Yeah.
trust more that the work is going to get done without having to be involved all the time?
We're at a moment where there's really no choice but to do that. And it's probably humility, right? Is the right. I mean, you have to be a lot of humility and acknowledge, how much is kind of out there, and find your way to connect and where you get your strength. And I saw a comment in there, I think it was Cynthia mentioned a reference to the drums,
Mm,
and to the native drums. And it hit me. And thank you, Cynthia, for putting that in there, because probably be fair to say, I don't care what culture you come from within our community, drum sits in the center. I sit in Puerto Rico with bomba, like drums, and you hear drums, it just attracts you, and there's something very spiritual and a connection in there. So I just kind of a side point. Our music has always been a language and a communication device for all of us. And sometimes we actually need that space to actually sit down and listen to what's being said. And I think there's some powerful messages in there.
yeah. Yeah, I think drums, music, culture, dance, I think that's the other really important thing in this moment, is finding those centering, those, we call it what roots us, but also keeps us going. And, drums are center in that. Dance, music, I know we share that love for those things, food, culture. I mean, it really does come back to, community, reminding us what brings us joy and what keeps us going and what we're working towards and for in the first place. The other thing that I wanted to talk about today is the power of fear, and really calling out the fear that I think a lot of people are experiencing. And I know we've talked a little bit about it as well. Particularly, neuroscience has been a really big part of my professional journey, and I've leveraged it to learn how we can operate better, and really keep the individual, the whole, in mind. And this is part of this self-care that we're talking about today. And one of the thing in the neuroscience that we know is that fear is the most powerful of all emotions. And when we're operating in a state of fear over a period of time, that what we're really doing is operating in this fight or flight mode constantly. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I feel like we are blocking and tackling all at the same time from these wrecking balls that are coming at us from every direction. And I think there's a real sense of fear, because when there's uncertainty and then you're constantly feeling like you're in a fight, am I going to keep fighting, or am I going to run away from this? And there's a self-preservation in both decisions. But that state of fear is so significant. And the important thing, from a decision making, from a leadership standpoint, is that when we're operating in stressful, high anxiety, intensified fear modes, is exactly when we have to make the best decisions and be rational and logical. But when we're operating that way, we're actually taking our prefrontal cortex, our logical conscious mind, offline. So if I'm high stress, if I'm in fight or flight mode, it actually shuts off my conscious level right when I need to make really good decisions. And when we're in fight or flight mode, our decisions can be rational, like irrational. They could be quick. They could be only focused on the immediate situation and not the long-term strategy. And I just want to call out that I do think when people ask me, why is this moment different? Well, it's different than last year when we as an organization saw shifts taking place and we began to strategize about how we were going to keep this work and mission going. And I talked about that publicly, saying this moment is different, and it was then. Why is this moment even more different than then when I said that? I think it's because of the heightened fear, because people are so uncertain about what's ahead, about what this means for the community, what it means for the work and the mission of organizations like ours. And I just want to acknowledge that for me, that's what feels so different, is that I do think we're living in a state of fight or flight. And you and I have talked about being ready for the fight and building up our armor. And I guess for you, what does that mean? What does that mean, being ready for a fight? And I don't mean, but the idea of like being ready to keep moving forward. What do you need to succeed in that, Harry?
I need, I'll say it again, busca mi gente. Like I really mean that, like at its core. No one can, you can't do this alone. And if you can, you're the most amazing person on the planet. I don't think that person exists. It's always been about community. It's always been about what we can do collectively. I saw a comment from Doris that said we need to connect more. And I think in the world we're in now, it's different. I touched on it in our first episode. We have the technology layer that's different, and that can be good or bad. And I think we need to start using it for good within our community and reimagine how we connect. We actually can connect in a virtual world now and do it in a way we couldn't do it 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it's one way that we can actually start to build our community bigger, larger, connect with more people, get more, help, more advice, more guidance. But for me, it's always accepting and understanding my limits as an individual human being, and that the power is always in the collective. And I'll go back and say, I think we still have a lot of work to do internally in our community and connecting and building bridges among each other. And I think if we continue to do that, and I saw another comment around we need to get above things we disagree on. 100%. Joelle, we've always talked about there's a cultural level connection that transcends everything, and we can't forget that. We don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to have the same takes on everything. But there is, I've always said it, and you've heard me use an analogy. If you put us in a room at 9 a.m., by 5 p.m., there'll be deep relationships, and it transcends. We have this cultural connection, but it starts with that bridge. And so we need more bridges, more connections. And even if we do it virtually, it's still powerful. And that's how I kind of think about it. How about you?
Oh God, it's so, that resonates with me so much. I get my energy being in a room with other Latinos. Listen, the best part about my job and this work that we do in this organization is that we get to be a part of connections every day. We get to introduce an entrepreneur who has a problem to another entrepreneur who has a solution or an idea about a solution. We get to introduce Latinos who otherwise would never have known each other, and we get to tell them why they should start working together. We have seen firsthand the power of connections. But to your point, we have so much work to go to break down silos, to begin to focus more on what we have in common versus spending all this time on the differences. I have long said, and I take a lot of heat from it from time to time from members of the community, that we have to stop perpetuating those old behaviors as a community of the old crab in the pot analogy, where some are beginning to make progress and we're pulling each other down because we're just playing this game of not wanting to be last. And what if instead we just started focusing more on the connections and the collaborations and looking more, instead of a deficit mindset of all the things that are stacked against us and the things we don't have, and instead focusing in on what we do have. And you talked about it. We do have the power of numbers. I say this every day, and you can record me and share this out. These words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, some will use them as words. I'm going to point this out for you. And this is important about building up, because diversity is our demographic destiny. Latinos are the second largest, fastest growing demographic out there. And that is going to continue for years and decades to come. And inclusion is an economic issue, because we're 3.7 trillion in annual GDP. Our consumption rates are high. If we want to make an impact, we can leverage both our numbers and our economic power. As a community, if we connect on those matters, if we trust one another to do the work in each other's lanes, and we collaborate more, I'm with you. I think that's all the buildup we need, but we got to get out of our own way, and we've got to stop playing the game of not last and start instead playing the game of let's move together.
Absolutely.
I think this is what is mission critical, especially in the moment that we're in. And I think the prosperity, the advancement, achieving what is our summit, and that is building wealth and opportunity for this community, I think we're going to achieve that, but only if we look at that collaborative strategy and implement it more seriously.
Yeah. I'm clapping. I'm clapping.
I mean, yes. All right. So we're gonna sum it up and wrap it up. And I just want to thank everyone from Dan and Doris and everyone, Linda, Frank. I mean, we have folks from all over the United States and beyond joining us today. And I just want to thank you for coming together, for allowing Harry and I to share a little bit about why it's so important that we build up, why we're building up, how we're building up, and why we want to encourage all of you to keep communicating with one another, to keep reaching out, finding community, talking about the tough issues, helping one another find the solutions to those tough issues. We are stronger together. We can summit together. And I'll just close by saying this, that I think the big themes out of today is that we get strength from one another. We find solutions from one another, and we will get through this with one another. And building up our armor is so much easier when we're helping each other do it. And so just want to focus in on that for today's Summit Up. We'll be back here again next Thursday, same time. And in the meantime, we'll respond to comments and just ask you all to share this information with folks out there, because we do think this is an important topic for all to be involved with. So thank you so much. And Harry, again, thank you for summing it up with me.
Always enjoy it.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.